Good afternoon and welcome to this event on addressing inequalities in the post-2015 development agenda for water, sanitation and hygiene. My name is Jarmo Viina and I'm the permanent representative of Finland to the United Nations. And before we start, I just want to say that this event will be live streamed as part of the thematic consultation on water, so that you know whatever you're going to say is going to be streamed to the whole of the world. It's not going to stay just in this room. I wish you a warm welcome to this event, and I appreciate very much you taking time from your busy schedules to come here. As you can notice from the title of this event, that we want to bring together three issues today in this event. First, inequality. The importance of equity is nowadays widely recognized as a key ingredient in eradication of poverty. Certainly this is the truth today, much more than it was when we agreed on the MDGs more than 10 years ago. Secondly, water, sanitation and hygiene, which are central to development efforts everywhere in the world, and the post-2015 development agenda, which has become part of our everyday vocabulary here at the UN. And I sincerely hope that we are not just going to speak about the post-2015 development agenda. I hope that we are going to be able to also to produce something concrete on this matter, actually something that is going to make a difference in the lives of the majority of this world later on. And I'm especially honored to have such an eminent list of speakers here today. They all have very good experience in reducing inequalities and promoting fulfillment of human rights and essential services like water and sanitation. We have here Ms. Katarina Albuquerque, who is the first UN Special Rapporteur on the right to safe drinking water and sanitation. And I very much recommend all of you, if you haven't done so, to read her report to the General Assembly from last autumn. The report is called Integrating Non-Discrimination and Equality into the Post-2015 Development Agenda for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene. So you can see that is very much also displayed in our title. We are very happy to have high-level representatives from two key UN agencies who have prominent role on these issues, including co-leading the post-2015 thematic consultations on inequalities. We have Lakshmi Puri from the UN Women, and then we have Manisha Saman from UNICEF. Thank you very much for joining us. And then we have two additional speakers. Jana Bertman is the Deputy Director of Eric Castrén Institute of International Law and Human Rights in the University of Helsinki, Finland. It's good to see a compatriot here. And Margaret Patti is the Policy and Campaigns Director of WaterAid, an organization which does remarkable work both on the ground and in advocacy. Thank you very much for doing this together with us. I know that you have come here not to listen to me, but let me just say a couple of words before I give the floor to Katarina. First of all, Finland has the pleasure to host this event together with Hungary, Thailand and Tajikistan, with whom we are steering the Friends of Water Group. Since the preparations for Rio +20 conference last year, we have organized several water and sanitation related events here in New York and also in other parts of the world. Even with the imperfections of the MDGs, they have proven to be a successful tool to reduce poverty. When preparing for the future development paradigm, we can certainly learn from the successes and shortfalls of the MDGs. Take, for example, the MDG targets on water and sanitation. Target on the water has been achieved well in advance, but on sanitation target, we are far behind. Are there any particular reasons for this? And is there something we need to do differently in coming years? And can we blame lack of equity in the case of sanitation that we haven't actually achieved the target we put to ourselves? And finally, as the current president of the Executive Board of UNICEF, I would also like to recall that 19,000 children die every day, and mostly from preventable causes. Diseases caused by the lack of access to clean drinking water are the main killer of children in today's world. We should and we must do better for the sake of the children in the world. And with these words, I give the floor to Catherine, please.
Thank you.
I wasn't
aware. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm very happy, very honored to have this opportunity to talk with you all about subjects that are very dear to me. On the one hand, the elimination of inequalities, and on the other hand, water, sanitation, and hygiene, which is well, I have to say it's a relatively new topic to me. I started working on it in 2008. But I think that I cannot live without it any longer. And I think that when you start talking about water and sanitation, you develop a passion for the subject, and you cannot ignore it any longer. And I think you start breathing it, living it day and night. And I'm very happy to be here today with all of you, but also with the fellow speakers, the colleagues here on the panel, and namely, well, UNICEF, UN Women and WaterAid. I'm very happy that we join our voices in calling for an end to inequalities, an end to inequalities in access to sanitation, to water, and to hygiene. And I think that at the moment, as you know, we were supposed to have this panel discussion during Sandy, but I feel that now.
Nobody came.
Sorry, nobody came. I don't know why. Nobody came. So I think that. I feel that now the discussions on SDGs, on the post-2015 development agenda, are much more present among all of you. So maybe, well, it's we didn't have a choice, but it is maybe better to have this meeting now than at a time where people were also very busy with other issues related to the GA. What I would like to tell you is that, in my opinion, a future agenda has to put at its center the objective of ending exclusion and discrimination for millions or even billions, I would say, of people around the world. Inequality is without doubt the most persistent of all challenges we face in the world in general. The contrast between those who have and those who don't have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene continues to strike me every time I go on country missions for the UN or receive information from community organizations and social movements. And what I see is that even in countries which have made impressive progress in managing to ensure access to water and sanitation to a large proportion of the population, what I systematically see when I go on mission is that you have always the same fringes that are forgotten, always the same fringes that are left behind, always the same fringes who don't benefit from the progress that has been made for the majority of the population. And if this has been allowed up until now, I think that, well, after 13 years after the adoption of the MDGs, we now know this is unacceptable. And we know this is something that has to change for after 2015. As you were saying, Mr. Ambassador, the figures are indeed shocking. We have, according to the latest data from WHO and UNICEF, there were 778 million people without access to improved water sources. And if you then look at some disaggregation of data, you see that obviously the number of people without access to improved drinking water sources in rural areas is 5 times greater than in urban areas. You know, for example, we know that there are 2.5 billion people without access to improved sanitation, 1.1 billion people, which is 15% of the world population, who practice open defecation on a daily basis. But of course, we also know that according also to UNICEF and WHO figures that you see an increase in access to sanitation. For example, there is in South Asia, for example, there was an improvement of access to sanitation. Among the poorest, the improvement rate was of 5%, whereas the increase in one of the most top wealth quintiles was of 31%, 6 times more. So you see, there has been progress made, but those who need most to benefit from progress are the ones who benefit less. I want to take this opportunity also to refer to the fact that I was referring to improved water sources, that there are 778 million people without access to improved water sources, which does not mean that these are of quality, because there are still people drinking from a tap or from a protected well who don't have access to safe water. And I think that for the future development agenda, this is another fundamental criterion that has to be fully integrated in the new agenda. We have to manage to say that people have the right to safe drinking water. People have the right not to get killed by the water that they drink. But now coming back to inequalities, regardless of the level of economic development of a given country, some individuals or groups who are excluded in a number of areas of life are also those who are discriminated against when it comes to access to water and sanitation. And I would like to tell you that in my country missions, I've gone to many developing countries, but I also went to developed countries like this country. I was on mission in the US, I was on mission in Japan and also in Slovenia, and the issue of inequalities is present everywhere. Hence, I think that with the post-2015 agenda and also the SDGs on the table of negotiations, we have to seize this unique opportunity to make inequalities a thing of the past. We must strive to find effective ways to measure what is happening more effectively and to strive towards universal access to all. My last report to the GA of October last year, which was, as you mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, devoted to the issue of inequalities in access to water and sanitation, offers more details, of course. But the main key points can be easily summarized. Number one, equality and non-discrimination must be placed at the heart of the post-2015 development agenda. For this purpose, I advocate, as other special rapporteurs, for a global and generic standalone goal on equality. That's number one. Number two, water, sanitation, and hygiene must have specific goals, a specific goal, targets, and indicators, as other areas such as education and health have had, because, as you know, we still don't have a specific goal on water. Universal access to water and sanitation must fully integrate the elimination of the inequality gap. Sorry. So there is no doubt, as you have said, Mr. Ambassador, that the MDGs have played a very important role in placing key issues on the agenda that might have otherwise been neglected. Sanitation is, in my opinion, a clear example of this. What I'm trying to say is that we have to learn from the achievements of the MDGs as much as from its blind spots. And the most important one of the blind spots is obviously inequalities. In other words, what I'm calling for is a redefinition of the concept of progress to mean only progress for everyone. Hence, the post-2015 agenda has to address several challenges and especially measure inequalities. Goals, targets, and indicators must be framed in a way that aims at reducing or even eliminating inequalities through targeting the most disadvantaged people. They must not continue to focus solely on aggregate progress and aggregate outcomes. That's number one. Number two, we have to collect data on inequalities. The current lack of data on certain issues is not accidental. Neglect often coincides with low political profile. There was a country I visited, and the numbers that the government gave me regarding people who had access to water and sanitation were very good. They referred to 99 or 98% of people. Then I started visiting slums. And when I started putting the numbers together, I understood it didn't match, because the number of people living in slums was bigger than the 1 or 2% of people who had no access to water and sanitation. And those people in the slums obviously did not have access. So when I met again with the government, I said, look, the numbers don't match. Your 99% versus the number of people I saw in the slums. And then they look at me and they say, the slum dwellers, they don't count. They don't even appear in the statistics. And so this is what we have to stop. Obviously they count. Obviously they have the same human rights as all of us here in this room. And they obviously have a right to water and sanitation. And in my opinion, they have to be prioritized by the government, because these are people who have traditionally been left behind, have less money to purchase water, and they have to rely on water from vendors that costs dozens of times more than the water which is being acceded to by middle and upper class people through intra-domiciliary PEP connections. So a commitment to better and more accurate data collection is fundamental, essential to identifying and monitoring inequalities. And then we have to go beyond the disaggregation of data. By itself, the disaggregation does not automatically result in the reduction of inequalities. It is the action of policymakers in response to the information revealed by the disaggregation that can result in the required change, which must then be reflected in target setting. And fourthly, monitor more than income inequalities. In order to assess progress in reducing inequalities, monitoring must focus on the causes of lack of access to water and sanitation. For example, a person with disability or a person from an ethnic minority might both be poor and lack access to facilities, but the reason for their lack of access are different. The reasons are different, and therefore the policy responses needed are obviously different. So moving more specifically to water, sanitation, and hygiene, my main point is that we can't treat these fundamental human rights as a subcategory any longer. In the 21st century, with all the technological advances, it is unacceptable that millions of children, women, and men of all ages continue to lack access to a clean toilet, to water for personal hygiene, or to a glass of safe water from a tap, and to the essentials of a dignified life. The link between water and human rights is also not new. Ensuring the protection of various human rights has had significant implications for how water resources and wastewater have been managed, whether in relation to health or agriculture, to mention just a few areas. Since 2010, when the General Assembly explicitly recognized water and sanitation as human rights, these have been mainly discussed in the context of domestic water supply and sanitation. However, the rights to water and sanitation and other connected human rights are increasingly present in the broader water sector discussions, and namely in the framework of the thematic consultation, or of the ongoing thematic consultation on water. I have prepared a paper which I submitted to the thematic consultation. It has been recently posted, where I try to make the links between human rights, water, sanitation, and hygiene, but also integrated water management and wastewater. And I have to tell you that since 2011, there has been a group of experts, hundreds of experts that have been working on the definition of goals, targets, and indicators for water, sanitation, and hygiene. So the creation of this group was promoted by UNICEF and WHO, and we have been working since May 2011. So it's almost 2 years. And I invite you all to look at the proposals made by this group of experts, which shows that it is possible to work together, people from very different angles, from different areas of the world, with different backgrounds, and it is possible to integrate human rights in the post-2015 water and sanitation agenda. So what I think is that we have to be ambitious. Real changes do not happen unless we have a vision, we have goals that truly can inspire action from all different players towards a common good. in this sense, I think that the post-2015 agenda gives us a unique opportunity and to revisit the issue of inclusion of human rights, eliminate inequalities, give a prominent role to water and sanitation. And all of you here in New York have a crucial role to play in these negotiations. And what I would like to say is that, of course, the world is looking at you. I am also looking at you, and I'm happy to give the support that you might think is necessary. And I'm very happy to share with you some of the work that I've done, and to talk, to exchange emails, and to support you the best I can in order to make this dream happen. And what I want to say is that it is possible. I think it's a question of will. I did a collection of good practices on how to implement the human rights to water and sanitation, which has practices from all over the world, examples from governments, but also from small NGOs that are working to integrate the reduction of inequalities and human rights in their work, making sure that everybody gets access to water and sanitation. This copy is for you. And to finalize, I want to end on, I am Portuguese, with a Portuguese poet I like a lot, who said once, who asked, will you find stones on your way? I mean, difficulties on your way. Will I find stones in my way? And he answered, yes, I collect them all. One day I will build a castle. So I hope we will build a good castle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for that very inspiring presentation. I see that the room is going to get a little bit crowded, but from the organizer's point of view, it's always better to have a crowded room than a half-empty room. So I'm very delighted that so many people came. Now we give the floor to our panelists. First, I give the floor to Lakshmi Puri from UN Women. Can I hope that you would speak only approximately 8 minutes, so we can have some interaction also here, as there's so many people here. Thanks.
I'll try, because I think this is a very, very important subject for gender equality and women's empowerment, and then I will touch on the protocols, all of them.
Yes.
But what I want to say is that this is a very important consultation. This conjunction of water rights, the issue of water for development and sustainable development, and the issue of inequalities is a very, very important conjunction. And we want to stress this, we want to emphasize that within that, the mother of all inequalities is gender inequality, gender discrimination. So that is something that I would like to really emphasize and focus on. And when we are doing so, and since this is part of the consultations on water, in the context of the post-2015 framework, 3 things I want to emphasize. One, that in the MDGs context, it is very clear that you cannot, the unfinished business of MDGs is also linked to how gender equality and women's empowerment was not integrated into the other MDGs, including on water and sanitation. And so that we need to make good in any new generation development goal. Second, that in the narrative that is drawn up on post-2015 development framework 2, we need to integrate water and gender equality and women's empowerment. And the third, that as and when a decision is taken on water as a sustainable development goal, we must have gender sensitive targets and indicators. So this is the main point that I would like to make. And then I will also very briefly mention that we have led the inequalities consultation along with UNICEF. So I will not go into the details of that, but there is a report now out. And I would like to, of course, thank you very much, Katarina, for your passion, your commitment, and also all the groundwork that you are doing to highlight this connection between inequalities and water, and how the solution, really a critical solution to the water crisis that we see in most parts of the world, is also an issue of inequality, and sometimes most of all an issue of inequality, and gender inequality is very pronounced in that inequality. Now, what I would also like to illustrate a few examples, because I think we haven't really discussed the gender part of this larger water inequality nexus. So I just want to give you a few examples and issues that have arisen here. The lack of adequate water and sanitation is a great contributor to gender inequalities. And sometimes the cause, it's a cause and effect relationship. Water, sanitation, and hygiene are central to the achievement of women's rights in rights to education, health, food, and employment. Too many girls still spend long hours fetching water instead of being in school, and miss the opportunity to be the leaders of tomorrow. And I think all of you know all those horrific statistics about how many hours are spent by women in sub-Saharan Africa or in the developing world, billions of hours carrying water. So, they are burdened with managing water scarcity, fetching water, and performing other tasks which add to their drudgery, reduce their opportunities to decent work, exclude them from fulfilling their rights in all other sectors. And women's right to clean water is therefore an essential part of gender equality, social justice, economic efficiency, that's also a very important argument, and sustainability, environmental sustainability too, as you have been highlighting. And surveys from 45 developing countries show that women and children bear the primary responsibility for water collection in the vast majority, that is 76% of households. And this is both rural and particularly in the urban slums. And in 12% of households, children carry the main burden, but with girls under 15 years of age being twice as likely to carry this response. And then the sanitation issue. Restricted access to toilets outside the home and water collection tasks can also place women and girls at increased risk of sexual or physical assault and violence, especially at night. So, you have already spoken about the access of urban dwellers. 22% of the world's urban dwellers lacked piped drinking water and others. So I will not go into that. But just to highlight how it disproportionately affects women, because it increases their drudgery, their burden of work, because they bear the main responsibility for domestic water management, for provision of food and processing of food. And we have all seen pictures of long lines of women waiting with yellow jerry cans in slum areas, or in India, for example, we have these gharas. So this is a common sight, and this is symptomatic, or it kind of brings in vividly the responsibility, the burden, the heavy responsibility and burden of work that it brings on women, and the hardship it imposes on them. And of course, improvement in infrastructure services, especially water and sanitation, can help free up women's time and care work, and access to improved water sources has additional positive socio-economic spillover effects. In Tanzania, for example, a survey found that girls' school attendance was 15% higher for girls from homes located 15 minutes or less from a water source than in homes 1 hour or more away. So, the sanitation issue, women's responsibility again, and within a household, with increasing contamination of surface water and ground source, women and children as primary collectors of water are often the first to be exposed to waterborne diseases. And so a stronger focus on gender difference is of particular importance with regard to sanitation initiatives. An issue that has created controversy, of course, is the involvement of the private sector in the provision of water services. And I don't want to go into the details, but I think, again, in however we develop the public-private partnerships in the provision of water services, women's issues and their access to water and to services, and their involvement in the governance of water and management of water services is a critical element. In order to strengthen accountability for gender-sensitive water and sanitation policies, programs, and financing, as I already mentioned, there is need to recognize and support and train women as water resource managers, farmers, and irrigators. And by the way, we are not focusing enough on the agricultural side, the rural side of the water crisis, where again women, because they don't have land rights, don't also have water rights often. And their access to water in the rural areas is also, and their livelihood, and they are the main agricultural workers. So this kind of imbalance and inequality is also very much evident in rural areas. So we need to really train and build the capacity and support the policies that empower women to be water resource managers, farmers, irrigators, and that in turn will contribute to water and food security, collect and safeguard water resources within the household and communities. And they are also the primary providers of sanitation services, both in slum areas as well as in rural areas. So this is what should therefore be integrated into national development plans as well as poverty reduction strategies. Water has to be part of these other plans which address other inequalities like the gender equality, women's empowerment related policies, and plans, poverty reduction strategies, and national development plans. So I've already talked about how participatory it should be from the gender equality point of view. I've already mentioned that the post-2015 agenda needs to have water and sanitation indicators and targets that make sense from the point of view of women and girls and their equality and their empowerment. And I entirely agree with you about the statistical challenges, but also the imperative of collecting data and statistics. And in the case of gender equality and women's empowerment, we need to have gender disaggregated data and gender sensitive indicators. And not having that data is not an excuse. In fact, that should, putting that into as an indicator or a target should in turn create the political will, as you said, to have this data powering the actual delivery of policies and measures and action plans, and in turn the impact of those policies. So this is something that we entirely support, and so I just want to mention 4 possible areas. We are still working with all concerned on what could be gender sensitive targets and indicators. What are the areas that we should? So I want to just mention 4 points. Reducing the heavy workload and burden of women and girls in water related tasks. this is one indicator, one target that we would like to highlight in any water-related SDG or water-related MDG plus. Second, that how can we ensure participation of women in water governance and management? Third, access to wash services and infrastructure, including special measures to ensure that women and girls are particularly targeted in the provision of those services. Fourth, the environmental aspects. How do you engage and address the women and girls in the context of the environmental aspects? And there are two aspects in water. One is, of course, the pollution and dealing with pollution of water resources. And the other is how can women be involved and girls be involved in environmental and conservation activities. So these are some ideas that we are in the process of developing, but it's absolutely essential. I just want to recall the Human Development Report 2008 of UNDP, which said, and I love to quote this because it's such a comprehensive illustration of what we have been talking about, that water is a source of life. And it's not as poetic as what you said, Katarina, but in a more prosaic way, it makes a very powerful point that it's a source of life and a natural resource that sustains our environments and support livelihoods. But it is also a source of risk and vulnerability. It is in the early 21st century, prospects for human development are threatened by a deepening global water crisis, debunking the myth that the crisis is the result of scarcity. This report argues that poverty, power, and inequality are at the heart of the problem. So I keep making the plea, and we at UN Women keep making the plea, that gender equality and women's empowerment, therefore, must be part of any, and we keep talking about the blue revolution to get out of this water crisis, and any second generation green revolution, the agricultural revolution that we are seeking to launch.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi. Thank you very much. Highlighting the strong gender aspect there is whenever we speak about water and sanitation. And now I'd like to give the floor to Manish Saman from UNICEF, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, first of all, really thank you for organizing this. And I think it's great that we're all coming together around it. And UNICEF is definitely proud to be part of this. We're actually gathered here to be able to think perhaps a little bit differently and see how we can focus our actions slightly differently, something that the ambassador started off by saying, can we be doing something different? And I think today we have probably three main messages in terms of why it is important to be ambitious and committed to including equity and water and sanitation and hygiene to be prominently addressed in the post-2015 development framework. Firstly, I think we all know that the MDGs have indeed been successful in galvanizing global efforts towards improving the lives of the poor, and it's been stated earlier. But also how much more there is still left to be done to ensure that the current MDG agenda is achieved, but importantly sustained. Secondly, we should be bold and ambitious actually to strive for achieving universal access to safe water and sanitation and hygiene. And finally, investing in water and sanitation is investing in human rights, and it's investing in children. So just a few facts, some of the things that have been already perhaps mentioned, but I think it's important that we keep on remembering them. In March 2012, UNICEF and WHO published the Global Monitoring Report on Progress in terms of how we have moved forward on the MDG targets on water and sanitation. And it was announced, good news, that the world has met the MDG drinking water target. But there was a caveat, and Katerina has already pointed that out. let's acknowledge the enormous progress that has been made over the last 20 years, with over 2 billion people gaining access to improved drinking water supplies. But we recognize these achievements, but the report clearly also identifies and highlights that the job is far from finished for many of the reasons that were already highlighted before. Again, 780 million people, more than the populations of Western Europe and the US combined, are still lacking access to improved drinking water and safe water. And this figure actually masks the big disparities that we've been talking about, the rich and the poor, urban, rural, between regions, ethnic minority groups, and so on. And even where this progress has been made, there's actually quite a bit of a challenge in terms of sustaining these achievements. In sanitation, these figures are even more alarming. We're way off track. And if the trend remains, more than 2.4 billion people will still lack access to improved sanitation in 2015. So the progress that we've made is clearly uneven. And for example, the richest 20% of the population in South Asia is more than 20 times as likely as the poorest to use and improved sanitation facilities. Also, let's remember that 80% of those without sanitation live in middle-income countries. The lack of access to services affects different people in different ways, as has been illustrated. And let me take the example of toilets for boys and girls. And this is particularly important for keeping girls in school when they reach puberty. Recent data, for example, from Nepal shows that out of Nepal's 28,000 community schools, only 64% of these have toilets, and only about 9% of these provide separate facilities for girls. So it's a case in point, as Lakshmi was pointing out before. And here, clearly, apart from being deprived to the rights to adequate sanitation facilities, this is a barrier for girls achieving their right to education. So, nevertheless, there is reason for some optimism, as many positive developments are seen across the world, and we can draw many lessons from different countries. A positive one, perhaps, which is in Malawi, for example, which has provided the equivalent of almost half of its current population with access to improved water since 1995. And the differentiation between improved and safe was made very powerfully by Katerina, who, if you've just started on the water issue since 2008, certainly sound like an expert, I have to say that. So with the right policies and programs, we know that progress is possible. And yet, let's remember that there's still a lot to do to ensure that the current MDG agenda is achieved and sustained, and the unfinished agenda must not be forgotten. And any future development post-2015 areas must address these particular shortfalls. So we're really grateful to the Special Rapporteur, Katerina, for your energy and your drive and your intellectual effort that you've invested in pursuit of this work, and particularly for pointing out a clear direction on what is needed in the post-2015 development agenda for fighting inequalities in such a way to have a real impact on the lives of children and the marginalized and disadvantaged people all around the world. So UNICEF sees the 2010 General Assembly resolution that recognized the human right to water and sanitation as a renewed opportunity to emphasize our collective commitment to see that we achieve these rights, and the services are brought to every single person, including the rural poor and those that are hardest to reach. Importantly, we need to also bear in mind that each and every person retains these rights also in times of conflict. And I think that is an important point to underscore when people are at their most vulnerable. Universal access to safe and sustainable water, hygiene and sanitation, reaching out to everyone without discrimination, indeed is a priority and should be a priority in the post-2015 development framework. Let me turn to linking this to the whole area of child survival, development, and growth. Safe water and adequate sanitation are actually indispensable for achieving other developmental goals, particularly those related to child survival, health, development, in terms of children living to see their 5th birthday, in terms of the whole burden of stunting that we see in children, over 190 million across the world, whereby the interaction between disease and nutrition come together. And really, we're having children over and over again, not only getting enough food, but because of the disease burden of diarrhea related often to inadequate sanitation and water, are also not able to absorb the foods that they intake. So there's a vicious cycle going on there. And also the link to education and helping adolescent girls to stay in school. So water, sanitation, and hygiene is at the hub of many of the other children's issues. You may all be aware of a recent initiative, A Promise Renewed, that was launched by the governments of Ethiopia, India, with USAID and UNICEF support, that brings back into focus the whole issue of ending preventable deaths and an equity focus and reaching the most marginalized. Importantly, over 170 governments have signed up to this, and water, sanitation, and hygiene interventions are actually a key pillar and component of this overall movement to once again look at how do we end preventable deaths. Going into just a little illustration of the economic impacts, the World Bank's Water and Sanitation Program estimates that the total economic impacts of inadequate sanitation in Bangladesh, my country, amounts to a loss of about $2.4 billion per year. This is equivalent to about 6% of the country's total gross national product, and most of these losses are due to the adverse health impacts of poor sanitation. Very young children, those below the age of 5, are actually accounting for over 95% of the total economic losses in health. So if we can achieve progress amongst the most deprived families by focusing our efforts on them so that their development rights are given the highest priority, we can be both cost effective in the use of our scarce resources and also contribute to having more equitable societies. And it is possible and it can be done. And there is a lot of enthusiasm and passion around the issue. And I think together, if we're galvanized around it, we can move it forward. And this will clearly not be just only beneficial for the lives of the individuals, but overall for equality, stability, and overall cohesion in the world. And maybe just a final point, that we shouldn't forget that beyond all the numbers, drinking water and sanitation are rights and are also essential for human dignity. And this affects women in particular. We have evidence that from Africa that women are twice as likely as men to walk to fetch water for their households, and the average round trip is around 30 minutes. And we also know that in urban slums, and to quote a particular one from Kenya, it's an Amnesty International report quote, says, women more than men face the indignity of being forced to defecate in the open at the risk of rape and assault. So you can see how all these intersections come into play. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the universality of child rights and equity are really powerful imperatives for the post-2015 agenda. And water, sanitation, and hygiene needs to really feature very prominently in this new framework. It really makes sense to have these as cornerstones of our aspiration for a more just and better world. And this common vision and actions forward is actually for the many millions of women and girls who walk miles to find water for their families, for the millions of children who are stunted and hence deprived not only from a short-term growth, but overall long-term development and their potential as citizens. And for the millions of families who do not have access to basic sanitation, making them all the more vulnerable to disease and the issues related to gender inequalities. So I think really from UNICEF perspective, we're very supportive of the move forward. You know, we've been moving forward on a refocus on equity in all the work that we do. And so this could not be a more welcome consultation for us, which brings together different intersections of our work and the partnership that we have with other agencies as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And now I give the floor to Jarna Petman from Helsinki. Please, Jarna.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, and I must thank the Permanent Mission for inviting me here and for giving me the opportunity to study the impressive report of Madam Albuquerque. As you could just hear a few moments ago, the report is a passionate one, and it is very much a forward-looking report, whilst at the same time remaining deeply rooted in hard facts, data, rather than intuition or past practices. And as it examines in great detail the very problematic question of implementing the right to water, safe drinking water and sanitation, the report also comes to enrich academically. I'm an academic after all, so I'll offer you an academic view now. It comes to enrich our understanding of the conceptual makeup of this particular right as a social and economic right. And hence, for me, the report, reading it, was also an invitation to muse on the role of economic and social rights as a distinct category within human rights system. And as you know, whenever we evoke the notion of human rights in liberal societies, it is intuitively that we think of claims to say right to freedom, rather than those claims that refer to the fact that 19,000 children die each day of causes that we do have the means to prevent. When we say gross violations of human rights, it is torture rather than the fact of these children dying. And that this should be so owes much to the historical development of international human rights law. And this law has proceeded from a twofold assumption. First, that everyone has more or less the same capabilities. And two, what those capabilities make possible is self-sufficiency in adult life. And these presumptions, they spring from the idea of social contract, the idea that has shaped our political and legal world from the 17th century onwards. And this is the idea that liberal societies are based on a contract between equals, equals for mutual advantage, that people resemble each other in not only desiring to exercise sovereignty over themselves, but also in being capable of doing so. That people are roughly the same when it comes to their strengths, abilities, sensibilities, status. Now, this has had very profound consequences to those who have special needs. A dark implication that inheres in this seemingly innocent idea of a social bargain for mutual advantage is that those who are dependent are not full participants. This in turn has meant that provisions for them, for those who are not part of the bargain, can only be an afterthought, not part of the basic institutional structure to which they then only have to agree. And this, as the Special Rapporteur has so strongly pointed out and made eminently clear, is also reflected in the way that the Millennium Development Goals have been structured. Now, it is to these marginalized groups and to their absence from the Millennium Development Goals that the Special Rapporteur turns to in her report. The poor, the minorities, women, children, older people, people with chronic illnesses, persons with disabilities. Special Rapporteur seeks to set up goals, targets, indicators that no longer focus solely on aggregate process or progress and outcomes, but also include the discriminated, the most disadvantaged. And by redefining the whole notion of progress, she comes to call for a change in the current practices that serve but to perpetuate the inequalities. Now, realizing such a change is, of course, the stuff of economic and social rights, the very point of economic and social rights. Economic and social rights address the basic questions of material existence and well-being. They are about community, and they are about solidarity. As such, they are also about resource allocation. And as you know, it is precisely because of this that so many continue to maintain that economic and social rights cannot be conceived of in terms of a binding legal right. They are a matter of economic policy, not that of the judiciary, they say. Now, this is another less charitable consequence of the history of the modern concept of human rights, as formulated by the early liberal theorists and the great revolutions of the 18th century, for whom the primary, if not the sole, function of the state was to protect natural rights. Before anything, the right to property, that was seen to predate any existence of a state. And an understanding of rights that focused on limiting the power of the state to act forged a notion that economic and social well-being is a supposedly unique sphere, insofar as it involves matters of policy and distribution. And yet, I hardly need to remind you that the implementation of civil and political rights too entails positive government action and resource allocation. I wish to go further, though, and add that all human rights are, in fact, social rights. By this I mean that no right has any meaning outside the societal framework. Rights are either social or they are not at all. And it is because of this that the Special Rapporteur also points to the need for governments to be engaged, to have political commitment, because the right to clean drinking water, the right to sanitation, also has any meaning only through application. And to be sure, the political organization, that is the state, remains the primary means of securing different forms of distributional decisions for society's most vulnerable. In the conditions of economic troubles, if not crisis, however, political commitment easily begins to erode. As much I've come to see in my work within the European Committee of Social Rights at the Council of Europe. Now, should such erosion combine, as it so often does, with the emergence of competitors who have either never recognized extensive social and economic rights or are now prepared to trade them off to attract investment, then any effort to solidify foundations of rights soon begin to erode as well. Now, it is in this regard that I wish to draw your attention to another kind of political commitment as well, namely that of the civil society. Rights regimes, monitoring bodies, regardless of their status, need the various social partners and the NGOs, perhaps in particular the NGOs, to use the various procedural avenues to claim rights. Why? Because our ability to address inequalities through rights will not depend as much on recognition of a right as it will on the content and interpretation that we give to such rights. And here's the thing, if there is no sense of solidarity in the community, no rights will save us. Therefore, the institutional management of rights regimes, while not unimportant, will not be enough. Rights can be part of a project about solidarity and community only once they are embedded in a culture, life culture, of claiming rights. What will be ultimately decisive of the success or the failure of realizing also the right to safe drinking water and sanitation is whether it is taken up and used by states, surely, but importantly, also by individuals, groups, courts, administrators, ombudsmen, NGOs, international organizations, to respond to claims of solidarity and community. Rights will need to be accompanied with critique and contestation from such perspectives. And ladies and gentlemen, this is precisely what Madame d'Albuquerque has offered us, critique and contestation from the perspectives of community and solidarity, thereby revealing the structural blindness, the structural indifference to inequalities. And for this, I do applaud. Wow. Thank you very much indeed for your report, Katarina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jana. Speaking from an academic point of view and making a very strong political statement. Thank you very much for that. Margaret, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you to the Finnish Mission and Finnish Ambassador for championing this issue. Now, I urge you to stick around. You've heard lots of people speak. It's very hot. And I can promise you a film at the end of my speech, so do stick around. Everyone's offered a proverb. So my African colleagues often say that water is life and sanitation is dignity. And I think we can all coalesce around that idea. And it's just to come to a water and sanitation meeting and to see a packed, hot house with so much energy is fantastic, and our virtual friends online. And I don't see, however big the scale of the problem, and it is huge for sanitation, how can we possibly fail with a special rapporteur with the energy of Katarina? We are in very good hands. And we have many good friends. We have the Friends of Water with Ambassador Karosi here from Hungary, who's really leading a push in the UN to have Friends of Water coalesce. We have the Deputy Secretary General today, Jan Eliasson, who is a great supporter of our work and of the work on sanitation. He's speaking in China today, and he's speaking on sanitation and human rights, which is really quite something. And if you were here, many of you will have seen him do this, but what he will do, which is incredibly effective, he would do this. And he would say, 783 million people do not have the luxury of this glass of drinking water. That's incredibly effective. Actually, I look across around the room and I see that many of you do not have the glass of water in front of you either, so just bear with that for a second and hang on to that feeling. Now, water, I think there's actually a great deal of consensus here that water and sanitation is a human right. And also the point has been very strongly made that it is fundamental, it is the foundation of gender equality, of children's health, economic empowerment, you name the aspect of human development, and sanitation underpins it. And I think we all tend to agree in this room that is the case. What Katarina has done is really point to that blind spot which is incredibly astute, and to say the blind spot on equality, non-equality and non-discrimination is really the issue which we now need to tackle. And I think it's interesting, if you think back to 2000 when the MDGs were originally set, sanitation wasn't even in the mix. It came 2 years later. So here we are, 13 years later, sanitation is up there, we're talking about it, we have made some progress, but we really need to track that blind spot. That really is the key issue of the inequalities agenda. And as Katerina says in her report, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is really wider than ever, and that's what we need to focus on. So we know that WASH is a foundation for progress towards health, education, gender equality. We know some of the failings of the current MDG structure, and one particular one, which I don't think has been mentioned here, is the vertical nature of the goals. And obviously in conversations, that's something we talk about. But if you look at the fact that diarrhea is the second leading cause of child deaths, and it's preventable, as has been said today, there is no correlation between the WASH targets and the health targets. And that doesn't encourage cooperation between the sectors. It doesn't encourage joint thinking. So it's something we have to address as we go forward. And Katerina, you also make a simple statement in your report, and you say what is not measured is not valued and is not delivered. And you also say that mustn't be a reason not to act. We can't just fall back and say, oh, it's all too difficult. We can't measure hygiene, hand washing. But we must try and find an innovative way to measure these issues. And I think what we're talking about here are people who live on the margins of society, people right on the fringes, people with no voice, the least visibility. They're not here in the room, they're not online. And those are the people we're thinking of. So WaterAid, we work in about 30 countries. We've been working for about 30 years with partners to deliver access to water and sanitation and hygiene, and to raise the issue through citizens' action, advocacy, and so on. What we found that the key issues of inequality that we come across time and time again, the first and foremost is the excessive time spent by women and girls collecting water. And if I stop there, that would be the key issue. So I'll just have a glass of water to reflect on that issue. The knock-on effects of women and girls spending so much time collecting water has an impact on their education, on their livelihoods, on their daily lives, on their role within the society and the community. It is absolutely pivotal. If we chose one indicator, one aspect where we need to make improvement, it is on the time that women and girls collect water. Poor educational outcomes has already been mentioned. Simple, seems so simple. If we don't have toilets in schools, if we don't have segregated toilets in schools, girls will drop out at puberty. What are they going to do? We need toilets in schools. Poor health. I'm going to say it again because however many times you say it, to say that diarrhea is the second leading cause of child deaths under 5 is the most appalling sentence that you can utter. So we need to look at health outcomes and health of children under the age of 5. Risk of abuse. That you mentioned the risk of abuse, the danger, the violence situations that women can find themselves in when they have nowhere to. We talk about defecation and sanitation now. Well, we're actually talking about going to the toilet, going out in the bush and, having a shit, basically. I mean, let's face it, we mask a lot of things in technical language here. We're talking about such basic human needs and human rights. And women, when they have to go out at night, find somewhere in the dark, in the bush, to go to the toilet, they're at grave risk of abuse and violence. And we're talking about 1 in 3 women. Look around us, 1 in 3 women. Just unbelievable. Stigma, that's another issue that you pull out in your report, actually, Katrina, which is very powerful. And this reinforcement of stigma, of lack of cleanliness, lack of hygiene, therefore reinforcing our perceptions of various parts of society. People are dirty, people are unclean, therefore we marginalise them. And it's this cyclical nature of stigma which is associated with water and sanitation. Disability, I think, has already been mentioned. And this can be very simple as well in terms of access to latrines, access to toilet blocks. In fact, I've got a quote here from an Ethiopian girl who was working with WaterAid partners, a disabled girl. And she said, "The toilet at my school is not clean. I get out of my wheelchair outside, and then I am coming in on my hands. When I saw some dirt in the toilet, I didn't use it. I'd go back to my class. If I was not disabled, I could use the toilet anywhere. It is very painful not to go to the toilet." And this is the reality that we're talking about. And then lots of things come down to money, so lack of affordable services. And it's an outrage that it's often the urban poor in the slums who are not counted, who are paying the most for their water. They're paying the highest price for their water because they're not on the mainstream system. So what can we do about it? What can we do about this in the post-2015 framework? Well, WaterAid would offer three foundation stones for consideration in the debate. First and foremost, go on universal access. And everybody everywhere should have access to water, sanitation and hygiene, the fundamental human right. Secondly, we really would urge ambition. There's lots of practicalities, there's lots of reasons why not, but we really need ambition, and we want to see this within our lifetime. And taking an aggregate look around the room, I would say 2030 is within our lifetime. That's possible. So 17 years, this must not be a topic of conversation. And thirdly, very much relating to Katerina's report, we want a focus on the reduction of inequalities. There must be this progressive realisation. We mustn't meet these universal targets in 17 years' time and sit in this room in 15 years' time and find out that the poorest and the most marginalised actually haven't been reached. We need this progressive realisation, however hard that is for all of us. And it's hard for WaterAid. This is a difficult issue to tackle with. Katerina talks about a standalone goal on inequality, and the conversations with UN Women and others are looking at this idea of a standalone goal on inequality. And then conversation often turns to, well, how do you measure that? Well, actually, sanitation offers a very good proxy for inequality. So I think that's the connection between inequalities in the broad and sanitation in the specific offers a very, very unique way of looking at proxy indicators and progress in the area. So yes, we are actually looking at transformational change, and yes, it's within our lifetime, and no, it's not easy, but who says everything was easy? It's possible. If we put our minds to it, it's possible. We've actually lacked political leadership in the last decade, and we really need to turn that energy up and turn that tap on and get political commitment and leadership to this issue. And of course, those around me, not least UNICEF sat next to me, saying the detail of this is incredibly complex. And I'm not denigrating that and saying it's all about taps and toilets, it's all very easy. It isn't. But I think we can fixate on some key indicators here. We can look at reducing the time spent. And there's statistics from for girls in Nepal, actually, education, incredibly powerful. 15 minutes an hour, the difference that makes to girls' education and outcomes is very, very powerful. And we think that's the single most important factor in a girl's lifetime chances. Then also, when we look at the moment, we're measuring water and sanitation in a household connection, household level. We need to broaden that out and look at schools and health centres and workplaces. We need to look at the more public spaces. We also need to, I would suggest, offer some targets on hand washing. And this does sound incredibly basic, but hand washing can make such a huge difference to children's health. And something that I don't think it's ever been mentioned within the vicinity of the UN, maybe I'm the first to say it, but menstrual hygiene management. Menstrual hygiene management is key to women and girls' progress in life. And that really is something very specific as an indicator that we could look at, which runs across the whole gamut of inequalities for a girl's life. And actually was totally missing from the MDG debate along with hygiene. Sustainability of services, already been mentioned. It's no good setting up these services and 3 years later they fall into disrepair. We need to have ongoing commitment, both in financing, in maintenance, operation and hardware. And we need, finally, I think the conversation seems to generate around integrated approach. The silo approach of the MDGs just doesn't work. So unless you address sanitation, you won't achieve the progress that we want on child health, on maternal mortality, educational outcomes, you name it. I think that's agreed across the room. So I would like to finish by just offering the word to someone who's not in the room. It's a lady called Regis. She's a 48-year-old widow in Zambia. She has HIV/AIDS, and 4 of her 7 children have HIV/AIDS. And what we're trying to do here is think about these Regis who doesn't have a voice. I'd like to give her a voice. And this is a quote that she gave in conversation to WaterAid. I used to get water from the well, which was a long way. I had to get up at 3 a.m. because if you were late, the water was gone. I was given containers and chlorine by the hospital to keep boiled water because it is so important for my health to have clean water. When I got diarrhea, I had to travel 18 kilometres to the hospital to get medicine to help me cope. Now we have a hand pump in my village and I don't have diarrhea anymore now that I have water close to my home. I keep a garden to grow vegetables and groundnuts to help protect my body. As I am stronger, I am now keen to build a toilet. The education that came with the hand pump has helped reduce the spread of diseases, and the use of clean water, hand washing and toilets will help me live longer. With people such as Regis suffering such extraordinary poverty and hardship and indignity in our global village, here we are, the UN, we're a global village, the question that we're addressing in this seminar is the right to water and sanitation an imperative in the post-2015 framework? I challenge you, that can only have one answer. It is so fundamental, so basic. And the international community, and that involves every one of us here, we have the means to deliver this within our lifetime. So I'd just like to end with a quote from another inspirational girl who we've all heard of, who throughout her very short and hard life strove for an inclusive society, Anne Frank. She said, "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." Inspirational words. So I really would hope that we can grasp this opportunity. I know there's incredibly difficult negotiations and consultations and technicalities and all the rest, and I wish us all well with that the next year or so. But we really can end poverty by starting with WASH. So let's do that. Thank you.
In September 2000, all UN member states agreed to achieve 8 international development goals by 2015.
That, my friends, is what the peoples expect of us. Let us not disappoint them.
Since then, the Millennium Development Goals have helped transform the lives of millions. The target for water was met in 2010.
In September 2000, all UN member states agreed to achieve 8 international development goals by 2015.
That, my friends, is what the peoples expect of us. Let us not disappoint them.
Since then, the Millennium Development Goals have helped transform the lives of millions. The target for water was met in 2010. But 780 million people still live without safe water. The sanitation target is seriously off track. If current trends continue, more than 2 billion people still won't have access to a safe toilet in 2015. In sub-Saharan Africa, the target won't be met for over 150 years.
Famtala biga yula arma yela tonbala ti ya sanga ba la hantara la ya legada ba la hanyoka arma ti lotama mi mo ti tonmi la wanda ti ta wuso a ka ton ke lan ka tolon toti sura men sama barari lotora mi nyono man biloti.
In 2015, the world will create a new set of goals for development, and millions need water, sanitation and hygiene to be at the heart of the new framework. Safe water, hygiene and sanitation are essential for social, economic and sustainable development. They impact on nutrition, health, gender equality, HIV, maternal health and child survival. They are key to unlocking the poverty trap.
1 महिना 1.5 महिनामा यस्तो बिमार भइबस्छ यस्तो बिमार भएपछि घटीमा 1000-400-500 रुपैयाँ खर्च भइबसेको छ मेरो बिरामीमा खर्च त्यति नभएदेखि मेरो छोरी र छोरा जम्मा 4 वटा छ यही मावि स्कुलसम्म 4 वटा छोरा-छोरीलाई मेरो.
Almost 90% of diarrhea cases are caused by unsafe water and inadequate sanitation and hygiene. Half the hospital beds in low-income countries are filled with people suffering from diseases caused by dirty water. A lack of safe water, sanitation and hygiene also has massive economic consequences.
You know, when people are sick, they cannot work. And what happens is that the country loses in terms of its national income. And that's what I mean, that if we really want to grow, we must take care of this water and sanitation problem.
Sub-Saharan Africa loses around 5% of its GDP because of unsafe water and sanitation. The annual global economic loss is estimated at $260 billion. We have the opportunity to make this year a year of change. A new global plan for development offers the best chance in a generation to end extreme poverty and ensure that development is sustainable. We need a plan that recognizes water and sanitation as fundamental human rights. We must build a framework that delivers water, sanitation and hygiene to the poorest as a priority, and we must be ambitious. By 2030, nobody should live without safe water and sanitation.
Thank you. Due to my lousy chairing of this meeting, so we're actually running out of time, but let's do that. We take 3 questions and then I give the panelists the possibility to reply and so on. Okay, please, we start from the back.
Hello, my name is, sorry, can you hear?
Now we can.
Yes. My name is Kenza Kawakib Robinson. I'm the former UN focal point for the International Year of Sanitation and the former UN Water Secretary. I was also in Yangwei, the chair of the Gender and Water Task Force. Now, I'm very happy, and I want to thank Finland for organizing this meeting, because at that time we didn't have that crowd to talk about women and to talk about water and to talk about going to the toilet. And thank you very much for organizing that. Now, I very quickly, because Mr. Ambassador, I know that you know, the problem that we encountered is that they used to tell us, look, we cannot mainstream gender in water and sanitation problems because we do not have gender disaggregated data. In other words, if you have good policies, you need to have good data, and we don't have that. Well, let me tell you what, the first thing we did in the Gender and Water Task Force, we organized an expert meeting on gender disaggregated water data on water and sanitation. We came out with 6 gendered indicators, and we have proposed them to the Statistical Commission, to whoever wanted to hear, even to our friend from the Joint Monitoring Program. We haven't seen any of those indicators. So please, since the crowd here is diverse, I would like to see our friends from delegations to see to it that in their policy making, they look at those indicators that actually do exist now, and that will help you analyze the situation of women. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Robert.
Yes, we have a question that has actually come in from Ghana. This is over Twitter. What is a realistic way to ensure governments and donors prioritize the poorest and not just go for the low-hanging fruits?
Very easy question, yes. Anybody else? Okay. Katarina, would you like to say some closing comments here? There, sorry. Yeah, please. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, distinguished panelists, for your eloquent presentation. I'm Rabia from the mission of the State of Palestine. Just one quick question to Madam Rapporteur. Just to note a little bit, we know very much and we appreciate your very active role in what you're doing. And with regard to your visits, can you just share with us on which basis you decide to go to which country? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina.
Oh, you are giving me the floor. Thank you. I'll start with your last with the last question that was asked by the distinguished representative of Palestine. I try to ensure certain geographic balance. But as you might know, I am not free to choose the places I go to. I have to get an invitation from the governments, and I will. Well, there are some governments that accept me going to on a country visit. Others do not. And well, and then another criteria is also my availability, because as you might know, this is a pro bono work, and I have budget to do 2 to 3 missions a year. So all in all, well, I won't say anything more. On the question from Ghana, may I answer it very quickly? I think, how do we make sure that we prioritize the poor? I don't want to seem too optimistic, but the fact that we are having this discussion now, the fact that for 2 years in the discussions that we also had on future goals, indicators, and targets, the issue of equality figured so prominently, means that we are making noise. And for me, the answer is we have to make noise. We have to make noise to make sure that the most vulnerable and forgotten and marginalized people are not forgotten in the future agenda. So we need noise at the local level, at the national level, at the global level. And I think we are all responsible, all of us here in this room, but all of those people who are following this discussion online, we are all responsible to making noise and to making the inclusion of the elimination of inequalities something inevitable in the future development agenda. I think it's only through noise that we will get there, but we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lakshmi will reply on the indicators.
Thank you indeed for reconnecting. Yangwei is going to meet next week, and we would like to take that forward and immediately connect with you also. But let me say this, that indeed we need all the evidence that we can, all the intellectual, shall we say, ammunition we can to make sure that gender mainstreaming takes place whenever water and sanitation issues are considered. And it's never easy, and we can do with every kind of expertise that you also have. So let's connect and let's make sure that those 6 indicators find their way in some way. I also want to just make a comment on this whole idea of an inequalities goal. Whilst of course this is something that can be taken forward, I want to affirm that as UN Women and as many member states have also affirmed, there is indeed an imperative of having a standalone gender equality and women's empowerment goal, just as there was in MDG, there is still as MDG 3. And we feel that in any new generation development goals, there has to be a standalone gender equality and women's empowerment goal. And that gender sensitive targets and indicators, like in the case of water, must be mainstreamed into and must have a place of their own in other targets and other goals, whether they are an inequality goal, whether they are in the water goal, any other goal. That energy, for example, that's the other emerging goal, I would say. So in all of these areas, we expect gender sensitive targets and indicators, and indeed we'll work with all of you to make sure that that happens.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, I would like to thank all of our speakers for their very insightful and very passionate statements. Thank you very much. I thank everybody who participated here today, and I would like to thank also all the organizers who have contributed to the realization of this event. And from my team, I would especially like to thank Pasi and Jyvitta who have, and Anne who have done the main work in making this a real thing. Thank you very much.